My name is Marcus Alston. I'm the host of the Mindful Athletes podcast. This is episode 13. I'm joined today by Marissa Norman of Top Form Psychology. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. Thanks for your time, Marissa. Really excited to have a conversation with you. So we'll dive right in. So could you provide our listeners just a quick background on your journey being an athlete and how that, led to you being a clinical sports psychologist?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was first introduced to ideas around sports psychology in high school. My high school track and field coach, I think she was very progressive, and she had us doing things like imagery for the 4x1. So we would sit like in a line, and she would have us close our eyes, envision our leg of the race, and then stick past the baton and then for the next person to use imagery. And I thought that was so bizarre.
Hmm.
How can that possibly translate to the track? How is that going to help us? So I did some research on my own and started to learn about mental skills and sports psychology. I always knew I wanted to be a therapist, but then to know I could combine the sport element to psychology I was bought in. So immediately I'm like, I'm going to be a sports psychologist. So very fortunate to know that very young and made my education trajectory get me to the point where I was able to meet that goal. I also continued on with track and field in college at the University of Rhode Island. I did the pentathlon and heptathlon, where I was able to start to kind of experiment with these ideas around mental skills training and what worked for me, what didn't work for me. Went to Barrett University for my master's in sport and exercise psychology, then William James College for a doctorate in clinical psychology, and lots of internships and postdocs and jobs after that, but eventually led me to today, where I am a sports psychologist. I have my own private practice, Top Form Psychology, in New Jersey, and I have the opportunity to work alongside athletes from youth all the way to professional, whether that is on, mental health support or mental skills training support. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's amazing. I feel like I know we all have like dreams to aspire to be like a doctor. Like for me, like obviously I wanted to go to the league and, be a professional football player. I just think it's very rare to have that at a very young age. So that's very cool to see that, you wanted to do that in high school and then you basically dedicated, your life to this. So that's very admirable. So I really appreciate you sharing that. So I wanted to ask a little bit about how mental health has impacted your career. So I know you said your coach used a lot of imagery in high school. Maybe was there a point in time that you may have struggled, or you saw a lot of teammates around you struggle that maybe also like inspired you to get into this space? But just love to see how mental health impacted your journey.
Yeah. So the first time I was exposed to mental disorder was growing up and seeing it within my own family, seeing family members really struggle with their mental health. And I didn't quite understand what was going on. If I knew that I didn't feel that way, so I knew it wasn't necessarily an experience everyone had as far as a mental disorder, but I was extremely curious, did this hurt? What is this experience like for you? Why is this happening to you? And I asked a lot of questions, and my family was very transparent with me about sharing their experiences. And I was bought in immediately. I wanted to provide support. So that was my first exposure to that. As I got older and had sleepover parties and got to see a little bit of the world outside of my own family, I saw that everybody struggles to some extent. It might not quite meet the standard of a mental disorder, but that was something I was always curious about. So that was when I first got a taste around this idea of mental health. As far as my own journey as an athlete, I think um, I don't know if I would say at that point it was a struggle, but I definitely saw where my mental game had a huge impact on my performance. I did not come into my D1 program as a pentathlete or heptathlete. I just saw it my freshman year and said, I want to do that. That looks really cool. Like that is the ultimate athlete, someone who can do it all. And so really having to work on building up my own confidence and working on those things in order to be successful, because that is unheard of. And I didn't see a lot of examples of people starting new events in college. So seeing how important it was to work on my mental game in order to get what I wanted out of my sport was important. I think later on in life, I started to really personally experience the impact of a poor mental health. I definitely I've worked in environments that had a negative impact on my mental health, and really saw that that didn't just hurt me, but impacted the people around me, especially the people that I worked with. And so I realized early on in my career that if I wanted to provide quality care, it was important that I didn't just make sure to take care of myself when I was struggling, but also to be proactive in that and practice what I preach, essentially, because it impacts so many pieces of my life. So I've had that personal experience as well.
That's incredible. One thing that really stood out to me was the fact that your family was open and transparent about these conversations. I feel like it's a little bit taboo in the BIPOC, community, people that look like you and I. So that's really cool to see. And that'll kind of segue into my next question is, how do you think things have changed, from a mental health standpoint, going back to, when you were in college or when you were in high school to now?
Yeah. Specifically for the athletic population?
Yep.
Yeah. So I would say that, especially if we're thinking about college organizations, professional organizations, we're starting to see that they are now incorporating sports psychologists embedded into the systems. And some even have teams of sports psychologists working in the system. So that is growing, and that's a great thing, right? Because now these athletes have support and resources for people in the mental health field who also get the athletic identity, understand the system of athletics. So that's huge change. I'd also say we're hearing people coming out, professional athletes, college athletes, talking about their experiences around struggling with their mental health at a rate that we haven't seen before, which is great. It normalizes that experience. And it says, hey, just because I am a great athlete and strong at what I do doesn't mean I don't struggle. Doesn't just because, I am this race, or I have this much money, or I have this background, doesn't mean I don't struggle with my mental health. And so I do think that's great to hear from that. And that has been growth because, 10 years ago or more, we weren't having those discussions. We would not even be thinking about mental health. I don't even know how frequently we'd hear that term being utilized. For Generation Z, which is a big generation that I'm seeing a lot in my practice. I am very proud of this generation because I do think that specifically with this athlete population or generation, they are talking about mental health all of the time, and they are normalizing it. And it's just part of the normal discussion, that it's not a taboo topic as much as it was in the past. Even for my clients now, I'm always impressed because they talk about therapy as just like it's this normal thing, that, oh, you don't have a therapist. That's interesting. Like after practice, I'm going to go see my sports psychologist, and they're talking about these things and they're normalizing it. So I think we've definitely grown in that area as well, because obviously in the past, and still to some extent today, some people are embarrassed to bring that up. It feels like it's not okay to have a therapist. It's not okay to work on our mental health. But I think specifically this generation is doing a great job normalizing that.
I agree. They're doing a phenomenal job. And I guess let me ask you this now that you're talking about there's more people like yourself embedded within athletics. So how do you think we can still push athletes to, be the best version of themselves, but also creating a healthy mental health environment, essentially.
Yeah. I love this question because I think I hear this a lot from coaches. There's this misconception that we can't push athletes anymore, that they're more fragile, or we can hurt their mental health. I hear that a lot. And the truth is, every client I've ever worked with, every athlete I've ever worked with wants to be pushed. They need it, and they want to be challenged. But I think it's important to remember that there is an art to pushing someone. And I think oftentimes that's forgotten. If we think about the old school version of like pushing an athlete, that's not always going to fly for certain individuals. And I think people are having a hard time adapting how they're pushing people. But some things that, if you're working with athletes, you might want to consider is one, creating a relationship with them. We have to earn the right to push them. So get to know your athletes, get to know, a little bit about them both on and off the field. What are they passionate about? Why do they compete in sport? What motivates them? What's their personality? What are their goals, again, on and off the field? And if we get the opportunity to really know them, we are going to be more successful in pushing them because we understand, okay, for this person, being more stern really works for them. For this person, reminding them of their goals really works for them. For this person, having them compete against their teammates really works to push them. We're all so different. And to keep the individual athlete in mind, knowing their personality styles, their strengths, their weaknesses, use that information to guide you in pushing them. The other thing I will say is, especially nowadays, athletes want to just understand why they're doing certain things in practice. So giving them information actually creates more buy-in for them to be more receptive to being pushed. So if you're doing a drill that's like exhausting, that's tiring, that's challenging, help the athletes understand how that drill is going to contribute to the team's success, or how that drill is going to specifically help the athlete get better at the things they want to get better at. So taking that extra second to provide education, because the more athletes understand, again, the more willing they are to be pushed and to do that thing, because they also want to get better. Just like all the staff want them to get better, they also want to get better. I'd say autonomy, right? If the more autonomy we have over something, the more motivated we are to get it done or to achieve that goal. So give athletes some say in practice. Oh, coach, I think it'd be really helpful, if we work on X, Y, and Z, or, hey, I feel like this is a weakness for me. Can we work more on that? The more autonomy, the more buy-in. And then the other thing I'll say, in my experience, the athletes that are part of a system where the energy is matched on both ends, on both experiences, the more likely the more willing they are to be pushed. So what I mean by that is, for a coach who has the same energy when things are going well and when team is successful that they do when the team loses, or when they make mistakes, when the energy matches, that athlete is going to be much more willing to be pushed and challenged, versus an athlete that is part of a system where the energy is inconsistent, that success is just expected. There's like no celebration. There's just like, okay, we won, next one, move on. But when there's a loss or when there's a mistake, there's a lot of emphasis on that and a lot of energy with that. And that athlete is going to have a much harder time being pushed, because it's a threat to make a mistake. It's a threat to not be perfect. And so it's already a stressful environment. So being pushed could take them over the edge a little bit. So that is another consideration for those athletes. But again, I just want to say, athletes want to be pushed, and they still can be pushed. We have to just be intentional about how we go about it.
Yeah, and I had a very similar experience in high school where my coach, this guy was like 6'6", 6'7", like 280 pounds, just this massive guy. And he was definitely hard on us. And he would definitely yell at me a lot, at least when he first like transitioned into like the role, because I think he was just trying to like put his foot down and kind of establish like what he was trying to do. But it was really cool to see throughout the season, and as we like developed our relationship, he kind of changed his coaching style for me specifically, because he knew that I didn't deal with, or I couldn't take constructive criticism well when you're yelling at me. Whereas as opposed to like pulling me aside and say, hey, you did XYZ wrong, and just being like more personable about, the situation. So I can very much, relate to that. And since we are on the topic of coaches, this is more so a side note here. So my foundation, we're working on a bill here in Maryland that would require high school and public high school and public college coaches to go through a form of mental health training. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on legislation like that, and just the importance of coaches having some sort of education on mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say for my high school athletes that are very serious about their sport, oftentimes they're spending more time with their coaches than they are with their families,
Yep.
with their teachers, right? So coaches having this education and understanding around mental health, the people that have such an impact on that age group, is so crucial, and can help with early interventions. They are going to have the ability to spot people early on to say, okay, this person is struggling, but also they're a role model too. So having that education helps them approach situations differently in a way that fosters healthy mental health, right? If they don't have that awareness, it is possible that they do things without intention to do things that can be really harmful and in the long run. But I love that idea of having that in legislation and helping coaches have this education and awareness. It's not, I think people can hear that and be like, oh, another thing I have to do as a coach. But coaches have such a huge impact on the development, especially of high school athletes. And I think that can go a really long way.
Definitely. My thought process when proposing this legislation was like coaches, they go through CPR training, heat illness training, all these trainings that
Yeah.
could be a potential life or death situation for an athlete. Well, you and I both know a mental health crisis could be a life or death situation, but the coaches have no formal education on how to, have those conversations and refer the athlete to someone, like yourself. So I know we're almost at time, so I have a couple more questions, kind of going into more of your private practice. Could you just maybe share with our audience, like, what is some of your specialties, or like, I guess if you look at all or some of the other clinical sports psychologists, what do you try to do differently with your practice than some of the others?
Yeah, so I can't speak to other practices exactly, but what I will say about top form psychology is, one, it's still in its infancy. It's going to be 2 years old in this October. But from the beginning of its creation, I had been very intentional of making sure that I'm keeping the athlete population in mind, from the way I market, from what my website looks like, the language that I use in my content, the social media content that I make, the intake paperwork, the consent paperwork, the hours that I offer, the continued education that I attend, that everything has been created keeping that population in mind. Because I believe that the athlete population is a very unique population, and it requires a unique approach that might look a little bit different than what we would think of when it comes to traditional therapy. And so I wanted athletes to be able to felt like they wanted mental health support or to work on their mental game, to look at our website or to be informed about top form psychology and say, like, that is for me. Like, those people will understand that's where I can really get help. And so I have been intentional, and I will continue to be intentional in making sure that that's exactly what top form is.
I love that. Definitely being intentional. It's always a great thing. And let me ask you actually a couple more questions. So if there was an athlete, let's say I'm in high school, I'm a senior, maybe struggling with some mental health, I'm maybe trying to make it to the next level, like what words of advice would you give them?
Yeah. So you said high school. So first I'll just say, from a statistics standpoint, when we know about high school athletes high school athletes, is there was one study and they found that 60% said that they felt moderate to extreme levels of stress. What we know about adolescents, just in general, not just athletes, but adolescents in general, almost 50% have had a diagnosis at some point in their life of a mental disorder. Almost 50%. When we're thinking about adults, it's about 1 in 4 in America, 1 in 8 worldwide. So I share that statistic to say to that high school senior that you are definitely not alone. And I think when we're struggling with our mental health, it's easy to feel alone in that no one would understand. And that's just not the case. I also want to talk a little bit about the cultural piece. You know, in America, we live in a society that celebrates this hyper independence. Like, figure it out on your own, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, don't burden others with your problems, right? And then marry that with the sometimes messages we get in athletics, like you got to be strong, and talking about your emotions isn't strong, and asking for help isn't strong. But what I will say is that asking for help takes strength and is probably the strongest thing that you can do. And there are tons of amazing people, competent people, empathetic people, for therapists, coaches, athletic trainers, teachers, peers that want to support you. And so if you simply ask for help, and you start to create a network of support for yourself, you don't have to be strong alone, because you have the strength of all of the resources that you've created for yourself. There's tons of resources that many people don't even know they have access to. So ask your school counselor, ask your coach, ask the college that you're going to, what are the resources available to me to get that? And one thing I will say, I haven't met one single person yet that has ever regretted asking for help. So as difficult as the process might be, I've never met someone who regretted it. So go for it.
That's incredible. And I'll chime in, kind of stemming off of that.
Yeah.
You just gotta find your people, essentially.
Yeah. And they're out there.
Definitely. Well, we are at time, so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to plug some of our audience members into your social medias, Top Form's, website, or just any last remarks, or maybe some, projects that you're working on, just any last kind of comments.
Yeah, I would say that if you are someone looking for support, even if it's not for me, right, and you're looking for something a little bit different, don't hesitate to reach out. I want to make it easy for people to get the support that they need. So please feel free to email me, to reach out. So you can go to topformpsychology.com. There's resources for other ways you can access mental health support. You can email me and we can talk specifically about what you're looking for, and I can do the best I can do to help you find what it is that you need. If you're looking for sports psychology, mental skills training tips, you can follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Top Form Psych, at Top Form Psych. And I put out free content for those individuals who might not have access to sports psych, or just kind of want to get a feel of what it's about and what they could learn in mental skills training. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, make sure you guys check out Top Form Psychology. Check out those resources. I just wanted to thank Marissa for her time this morning. It was a really great conversation. And yeah, everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Marcus Alston of the Mindful Athletes podcast, signing out.